Imagine a lake so remote, so cut off from the world, that when winter comes, it feels like a forgotten piece of the planet. We're talking about Lake Anjikuni, but not the one you've heard stories about. This one is smaller, nestled deep in the northern wilderness, a place locals call the Mirror of Sorrows. Every year, as the temperatures plummet, its surface transforms into a vast, unbroken sheet of black ice, thick enough to drive a truck over, but nobody ever does. For generations, a chilling tale has been passed down, a story that begins one particularly bitter winter. The lake had frozen solid, a flawless expanse under a perpetually gray sky. Then, overnight, something impossible happened. A cabin appeared, right in the dead center of the lake. It was a small, ramshackle thing, made of dark, weathered logs, with a single window and a crooked door. The most unsettling part: there were no tracks, no footprints, no TD marks, no sign of construction. It was as if it had simply dropped from the sky, or perhaps risen from the depths. News of the phantom cabin spread through the nearby town, a tiny community of trappers and loggers. Most were too spooked or too wise to go near it. But you know how it is with teenagers. Curiosity, bravado, a thirst for adventure. It's a potent mix. A group of 4 high school kids, 2 boys and 2 girls, decided they had to see it for themselves. They piled onto their snowmobiles and raced across the frozen expanse, their laughter echoing in the stark, silent air. When they reached the cabin, the sheer wrongness of it hit them. The air was colder here, unnaturally still. The wood of the cabin was ancient, covered in strange, swirling patterns that seemed to warp and shift if you stared too long. There was no chimney, no signal of life. They circled it, their boots crunching on the ice, confirming what they already knew. No tracks leading to or from it. The door was unlocked. After a moment of hesitation, fueled by a dare, one of the boys pushed it open. The inside was even stranger. It was a single, dusty room, completely empty except for a small, leather-bound book lying on the floor. It was a diary. The pages were brittle, the handwriting shaky and desperate. The entries spoke of being trapped, of an unrelenting cold that seeped not just into the room, but into the soul. The writer described a constant, rhythmic knocking that came from outside, a sound that seemed to travel through the very ice beneath them. The final, chilling entry was scrawled in a frantic hand. "It knows I'm in here. The knocking has started. Whatever you do, don't answer. Don't even acknowledge it. Pretend you're not here. It's your only chance." As one of the girls read the last line aloud, her voice trembling, it happened. A single, loud knock echoed from the cabin door. Knock. It was so sudden, so sharp, it made them all jump. They froze, staring at the door, their hearts hammering in their chests. Silence descended again, thick and heavy. Then another knock, louder this time. Knock. Followed by another. Knock. 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 Panic set in. They scrambled out of the cabin, tripping over each other in their haste to escape. They didn't look back, just leaped onto their snowmobiles and gunned the engines, speeding away from the impossible structure in the middle of the lake. As they fled, they could still hear it. The knocking didn't stop at the cabin door. It began to echo across the entire lake, a slow, methodical rhythm that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was as if the lake itself was knocking, a deep, resonant boom that vibrated through the ice, through their snowmobiles, right into their bones. They didn't stop until they were back in town, bursting into the local diner, pale and breathless, trying to explain what had happened. The adults listened, their faces grim. They had heard the stories. The knocking continued all night. Everyone in the small town heard it, a relentless soul-shaking beat that pulsed from the direction of the lake, a sound that kept them awake, staring into the darkness, wondering what lay out there on the ice. By dawn, the knocking finally stopped. A profound silence fell over the town, more unnerving than the noise it replaced. A few of the braver townsfolk, along with the sheriff, decided to investigate. They drove out to the lake, the rising sun casting long, eerie shadows across the ice. But when they reached the spot where the cabin had stood, there was nothing. It was gone. The ice was as smooth and unbroken as it had been 2 days before. There was no hole, no debris, no sign that anything had ever been there at all. The phantom cabin had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. The teens who had found the diary were questioned, but their stories never wavered. They were terrified, changed by the experience. One of them, the boy who first opened the door, swore he saw something as they fled. He said that, for a split second, the single window of the cabin had glowed with a faint, pale light, and in it, he saw a face gaunt, desperate, and silently screaming. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, revealing the true clarity of the black ice, people started noticing something else. Dark, shadowy shapes were visible just beneath the surface. They were vaguely humanoid, elongated, and distorted by the frozen water. They seemed to be suspended in the darkness of the lake, motionless, their positions scattered across the vast expanse. Were they logs, strange rock formations, or were they something else? No one dared to get a closer look. They just stared, a cold dread creeping into their hearts. The lake held its secrets tightly. Life in the town tried to return to normal, but the memory of that night lingered like a frost that wouldn't thaw. The lake, once a place of winter recreation, was now an object of fear. People avoided it, casting wary glances at its dark, glassy surface. The story of the knocking cabin became another layer to the local lore, a cautionary tale whispered to children. And then, the next winter came. The lake froze over once more, a perfect, dark mirror under the winter moon. But this time it wasn't in the center of the lake. It had reappeared in a completely different spot, closer to the western shore. It stood there, silent and menacing, a dark silhouette against the white snow. No tracks, no explanation. Just an impossible presence. No one went near it this time. The memory of the knocking, of the shadows, under the ice, was too fresh, too terrifying. They just watched it from a distance, wondering what poor soul's diary might be lying on the floor inside this time. They wondered if the knocking would start again, and they prayed for the spring thaw. For the day the ice would break and the cabin would once again be swallowed by the dark, cold water of the lake, taking its chilling secrets with it, at least until the next winter. The mirror of sorrows always claims what it reflects. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy stories that explore the strange and unexplained, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. Stay curious and stay safe. Ever heard a story that just burrows under your skin and stays there? Well, this is one of them. It has a tale that has been whispered around campfires and in late-night chat rooms for years. The story of the frozen footprints. It all started with a family, the Millers, who decided to spend a winter getaway in a remote cabin deep in the woods. They wanted to disconnect, to enjoy the serene beauty of a world blanketed in white. The first few days were perfect. Snow fell gently, creating a picturesque winter wonderland. They built snowmen, had snowball fights, and huddled by the fire with hot cocoa. But then, the big storm hit. It wasn't just a heavy snowfall. It was a blizzard, the kind that howls and rages, completely cutting them off from the outside world. The wind screamed, and snow piled up in massive drifts, burying their car and sealing them inside their cozy wooden refuge. On the second day of being snowed in, Mr. Miller was looking out the kitchen window, sipping his morning coffee, when he saw something strange. A single set of footprints, stark and dark, against the pristine, untouched snow. This was immediately unsettling. No one had been out. The storm was too severe. But the truly bizarre part wasn't just that they were there. It was the direction. The footprints led directly to the front porch of the cabin, but there were no corresponding tracks leading away. It was as if someone, or something, had walked out of the heart of the storm right up to their door and then simply vanished. He called his wife and 2 kids to the window. They all saw it. A sense of unease began to creep into their cozy retreat. Their initial thought was a prank. Maybe a neighbor from one of the other cabins, miles away, had a twisted sense of humor. But that made no sense. The storm was impassable, and who would brave such conditions for a silly joke. And how did they leave without a trace? The footprints just stopped. Mr. Miller, trying to be the rational father, decided he'd just clear them away. He bundled up, grabbed a shovel, and stepped out onto the porch. The wind was brutal, stinging his face. He plunged the shovel into the snow where the first footprint was, but nothing happened. He tried again, scraping harder. It was like trying to shovel solid ice. The snow around the print could be moved, but the print itself was completely frozen, embedded into the ground. It was unnatural. He tried to kick at it, but it was like kicking a rock. The footprint didn't smudge. It didn't break. It just remained perfect and ominous. Spooked, he retreated back inside, the warmth of the cabin no longer feeling so comforting. The family spent the rest of the day nervously glancing out the windows. The footprints were always there, a silent testament to an impossible visitor. They checked all the locks, twice. As night fell, the storm continued to rage, and the family huddled together, the strange event casting a dark shadow over them. The next morning, the first thing they did was check the window. The footprints were still there, unchanged by the fresh layer of snow that had fallen overnight. The new snow seemed to avoid them, as if repelled by some unseen force, leaving the dark prints perfectly visible. But that wasn't the worst part. Mrs. Miller was the one who noticed it. She let out a small gasp. "They're closer," she whispered. Her husband rushed to her side. She was right. The line of footprints, which had stopped about 10 feet from the porch yesterday, now seemed to have advanced. The last print was now just a few feet from the steps. It was impossible. No new tracks had been made. The existing prints had somehow moved. It was as if the ground itself was shifting them, inch by inch, toward the house. Panic began to set in. They were trapped. The phones were dead, the car was buried, and something inexplicable and menacing was happening right outside their door. They tried to ignore it, to distract themselves with board games and books, but their eyes kept being drawn back to the window, to those relentless, advancing footprints. Every few hours, they would check, and each time their hearts sank a little further. The prints were undeniably moving, a slow, terrifying crawl towards their sanctuary. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old cabin, every howl of the wind, sounded like a footstep on the porch. They sat up all night, listening, waiting. The third morning, they woke to a deafening silence. The storm had passed. Sunlight streamed through the windows, glinting off the fresh, deep snow. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over them. Maybe the nightmare was over. Then, the oldest child, a boy of about 10, screamed. He was pointing, not out the window, but at the floor of the living room. There, on the wooden floorboards, was a single, wet footprint. It was the same size, the same shape as the ones outside. But this one was inside. There were no other marks. No puddle of melting snow. The door was still locked from the inside. The windows were all latched. There was no rational explanation for how a single wet footprint could have appeared in the middle of their lockdown cabin. And then they saw another, and another, leading from the front door, across the living room, and stopping right at the foot of the stairs that led up to the bedrooms. The family didn't scream. They didn't even speak. They just looked at each other, a shared, primal terror in their eyes. The thing from outside was now inside. Without a second thought, Mr. Miller grabbed his wife and kids. They didn't pack, they didn't grab their coats. They burst out the back door, plunging into the waist-deep snow, fighting their way through the drifts with adrenaline-fueled desperation. They didn't look back. They hushed run, fleeing their winter paradise that had become a prison, leaving everything behind. The story usually ends there, with the family making it to a road and being picked up by a snowplow driver, babbling incoherently about footprints that walk on their own. But there's an epilogue. Months later, when the spring thaw finally melted the massive snowpack, the owner of the cabin went to check on his property. He found it abandoned, the front door ajar. Inside, everything was just as the Millers had left it. Half-finished cups of cocoa, a board game scattered on the floor. It was like the family had just vanished into thin air. The owner cleaned the place up, puzzled, but but assuming the family had to leave in a hurry. But as he was sweeping the floor, he noticed something. Faint, dark stains on the wooden floorboards. They were shaped like footprints. He scrubbed and scrubbed, but the stains wouldn't come out. They seemed to be burned into the very grain of the wood. The footprints were still there, leading from the door, across the living room, and stopping at the base of the stairs. The cabin is still out there, deep in the woods, and they say, if you're brave enough to find it and step inside, you can still see them. The frozen footprints that never melted, what do you think happened? Was it a ghost, a creature, or something else entirely? These kinds of unexplained stories are fascinating because they leave so much to the imagination. It makes you wonder what other secrets are hidden out there, buried under the snow. Thanks for listening to this creepy tale. If you love mysteries and stories that give you chills, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video. Stay curious, and maybe think twice about that remote cabin getaway. See you next time. Ever been snowed in? I mean, really snowed in, where the world outside your window just disappears under a blanket of white, and the only sound is the howling wind. It's cozy at first, right? You've got your family, some hot chocolate, maybe a board game. But what if that cozy feeling curdles into something else entirely? What if the blizzard isn't the only thing trying to get in? This story comes from a family who experienced a blizzard unlike any other. It was late, almost midnight. The snow was coming down so hard it looked like a solid white wall outside. The kids were asleep, or so the parents thought. The wind was screaming, rattling the old farmhouse. It's a sound you get used to out in the country. But this night, something else cut through the noise. Tap, tap, tap. It was soft, almost lost in the storm. The father heard it first. He paused, listening. The wind can play tricks, make you hear things. E ignored Italiano, but then it came again. Tap, tap, not the front door. The window. Who in their right mind would be out in this blizzard, knocking on a window instead of the door, which was just a few feet away? His wife heard it this time too. They looked at each other, confusion turning to unease. He crept over to the window, peering through a small gap in the curtains. Nothing. Just a swirling vortex of snow. No person, no silhouette, nothing. More importantly, no footprints. The snow beneath the window was a pristine, undisturbed drift, already several feet deep. It was impossible for anyone to be standing there without leaving a trace. He told himself it was a branch, or ice hitting the glass. To be. He went back to the sofa, trying to shake off the creepy feeling. But the knocking returned, louder this time. Tap. Listen, men, not random like a branch. It was the sound of a knuckle on cold glass. An icy chill, colder than the winter air, snaked its way up his spine. His wife was pale. "Who is that?" she whispered. He didn't have an answer. All he knew was that it felt wrong, deeply wrong. That's when they heard a small voice from the hallway. It was their youngest, their 7-year-old son, standing there with wide, terrified eyes. "Mommy, Daddy," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There's someone at the window." The parents exchanged a worried glance. "It's just the wind, sweetheart," the mother said, trying to sound calm, but the boy shook his head. "No," he said, his little face a mask of fear. "He's talking to me. He says to let him in." A wave of pure dread washed over the room. Let him in. No one had spoken. The only sound was the wind and that incessant, rhythmic knocking. As Sifonque, the lights in the house flickered violently, plunging them into near darkness for a second before sputtering back to life. In that moment, the temperature in the room plummeted. Not just a draft, but a sudden, bone-deep cold, as if a freezer door had been thrown open right next to them. They could see their own breath misting in the air. Tap, tap, tap. It was more insistent now, almost demanding. The father grabbed his son, pulling him close. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. They were trapped, not just by the storm outside, but by whatever was Asterisk. At Asterisk, their window, trying to get in. The boy started crying softly, burying his face in his father's chest. "He's getting cold," the boy whimpered. "He wants to come inside where it's warm." Panic set, and the father's mind was racing. "Call the police." What? He say? That the wind was knocking on his window and whispering to his son. They'd think he was crazy. He had to do something. He couldn't stand the sound anymore. The feeling of that presence, just on the other side of the glass. "The blanket," his wife suddenly said, her voice tight with fear. "Cover the window. Cover it now." It was a desperate idea, but it was better than doing nothing. He grabbed the thickest quilt they owned, the one they kept on the back of the sofa. Heart pounding in his chest, he lunged toward the window. He didn't dare look out. He just threw the heavy quilt over the entire frame, covering it completely, plunging the room into dim, muffled silence. And just like that, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the noise had been. They stood there, frozen, listening. Nothing. The wind still howled, but the personal, targeted tapping was gone. The unnatural cold in the room slowly began to recede, and the air felt ... lighter. They spent the rest of the night huddled together in the living room, too scared to sleep, listened to every creak and groan of the old house. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, revealing a world buried in snow. The storm had passed. Cautiously, the father approached the window. He hesitated for a long moment before pulling back the quilt. The world outside was bright, white, and peaceful, but his breath caught in his throat. Frozen into the thick layer of ice that coated the outside of the window pane were handprints. Two of them. They were perfectly formed, as if someone had stood there for hours, pressing their hands against the glass, trying to leach the warmth from inside. The prints were long and slender, and they were located high up on the window, far higher than a person could comfortably reach from the ground, especially with several feet of snow piled up. And still, beneath the window, the snow remained a perfect, untouched blanket. There were no tracks leading to the house, and no tracks leading away. Later that week, when the roads were finally cleared, the father cautiously mentioned the strange incident to his closest neighbor, an old farmer who had lived in the area his whole life. He expected the old man to laugh, to tell him it was just blizzard nerves. But the farmer didn't laugh. His face grew serious, and he looked out toward the empty fields. "Ah," he said, nodding slowly. "You heard the caller? Happens sometimes, during the worst storms. My grandfather used to talk about it. Says they're spirits of those who got lost in the snow, forever cold, forever looking for a warm place to rest." He took a puff from his pipe. "They knock, they whisper. They promise you things, but you must never, ever let them in. You did the right thing, covering the window. You don't want to see what's out there, and you certainly don't want to invite it inside." The family never forgot that night. Every time the winter wind howls and the snow begins to fall, they pull the curtains tight, and they listen. Listen for that soft, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. Because they know the blizzard isn't the only thing that comes with the storm. Something else is out there, waiting in the cold, wanting to be let in. Thanks for watching. If you have a story about something strange you've experienced during a storm, share it in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling tales. Stay safe out there. Have you ever driven down a desolate road late at night and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature? The kind of cold that crawls up your spine and whispers that you're not alone. Tonight, we're heading into the heart of a blizzard, to a place where the wind carries more than just snow. This is the story of the snowy highway, and the voice that whispers in the storm. Our story begins on a forgotten stretch of mountain highway, a ribbon of asphalt swallowed by a relentless blizzard. For hours, the only sound was the roar of a diesel engine and the rhythmic scrape of a massive steel plow. Behind the wheel was a man named Mark, a seasoned veteran of the road crew. He knew these mountains like the back of his hand. Every curve, every dip. He'd seen his share of bad weather, but this storm was different. The snow fell so thick and fast it was like driving through a solid white wall. The world outside his cab had vanished, leaving only the hypnotic dance of snowflakes in his headlights. Mark was hours into his shift, deep in the most isolated part of his route. The radio was silent, the signal lost to the storm, and the sheer rock faces surrounding him. It was just him, his machine, and the storm. As he navigated a particularly treacherous switchback, he heard it. At first, it was faint, almost lost in the engine's growl and the howling wind. It was a whisper, a single syllable that seemed to weave through the storm's chaos. He shook his head, blaming it on fatigue. He was tired. His eyes were strained from staring into the blinding white. It was nothing. He kept driving, pushing tons of snow to the side of the road, carving a path through the wilderness. But the sound came again, a little clearer this time. It was a voice, a soft, eerie whisper that seemed to come from right beside him, yet also from everywhere at once. It sounded like it was being carried on the wind itself, a chilling, ethereal murmur. It said his name. Mark. He slammed on the brakes, the massive plow groaning to a halt. The cab fell silent, save for the idling engine and the muffled scream of the wind outside. He looked around the empty cab, his heart starting to pound in his chest. There was no one there. He tried to reason with himself. It had to be the wind playing tricks on him, the strange acoustics of the storm creating phantom sounds. He'd been alone for too long. He took a deep breath, put the plow back in gear, and started moving again. But the voice didn't stop. It grew more insistent, more frickin' Mark ... Mark ... It was a woman's voice, he realized. It was calm, yet filled with an unnerving persistence. It echoed in his ears, seeming to come through the vents, through the glass, through the very steel of the cab. He turned up the radio, blasting static to drown it out. But the whisper cut right through it, as clear as if someone were sitting in the passenger seat next to him. Panic began to set in. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't the wind. Every instinct screamed at him that something was terribly wrong. He pushed the plow faster, desperate to get through his route and back to the depot, back to civilization and lights. As he rounded a sharp bend, his headlights caught something in the freshly plowed road behind him. He looked in his rearview mirror, his blood running cold. Trailing directly behind his plow were strange marks in the snow. They weren't tire tracks. They looked like something had been dragged. Two parallel grooves, deep and unnatural, as if something heavy was being pulled along right in his wake. He hadn't passed anything. He hadn't hit anything. He was the only one out here. Where did these marks come from? He stared into the mirror, mesmerized and horrified, as the drag marks continued to appear in the snow behind him, keeping perfect pace with his vehicle. The voice was constant now, a maddening loop. Mark ... Mark ... Mark ... It was no longer just a whisper. It was a clear, direct call. He felt like he was being hunted, stalked by something unseen that left its ghostly trail right behind him. The combination of the voice and the inexplicable marks was too much. Mark couldn't take it anymore. In a final act of desperation, he stopped the plow right in the middle of the highway. He didn't even turn off the engine. He threw open the door and jumped out into the raging blizzard, leaving the headlights cutting through the snow, the engine running, and the wipers still beating against the storm. Just run. He ran into the blinding white, away from the machine, away from the voice, away from the drag marks that led to nowhere. He vanished into the storm. When Mark didn't check in at the end of his shift, a search party was sent out. They found his snowplow hours later, abandoned in the middle of the pass. The engine was still warm, the cab empty. The strangest part was the tracks. Leading from the driver's side door were a single set of footprints. Mark's footprints, heading off the road and into the deep snow of the forest. They went on for about 50 yards, and then they just stopped. There were no other tracks around them, no sign of a struggle, no sign of an animal. It was as if he had simply been plucked from the earth. Mark was never seen again. The story could have ended there, a tragic but explainable tale of a man who succumbed to the harsh conditions in his own exhausted mind. But it didn't. In the years that followed, other plow drivers were assigned the remote mountain route, and they started reporting strange things. They would be alone, miles from anywhere, when they would hear it. A soft, whispering voice on the wind, calling a name that wasn't their own. Mark. So many drivers new to the route would radio in, asking if another crew member was trying to reach them on a different channel. The dispatcher would always reply the same way. "No one's out there but you." The stories spread among the road crews. The drag marks were seen again, appearing from nowhere behind the plows, trailing them for miles before disappearing. The feeling of being watched, of being followed, became a common experience on that stretch of highway. Eventually, no one wanted the night shift for that route.